Well, thanks so much, everybody, for having me. I'm going to apologize in advance. If you haven't noticed, it's been windy, and there's been a lot of smoke, so my voice may be a little bit raspy, so I'm going to apologize now. But I'll tell you, this is an important subject for me that I'm very passionate about, and it's interesting. I've done a lot of these presentations over the years in Tulsa, especially as we've really pushed diversity and inclusion, especially in the business case. And I remember the first presentation I did, which I'll talk about later, but I look around the room now, and there are so many leaders in this community that are here, so many volunteers that are here that already get this. So I know a lot of you have, some of you have heard some of this before, so I'll apologize now, but I thought what I would do is share a little bit of a story today about, talk a little bit about us personally, because we all bring a sense of bias, if you will, even myself, when it comes to diversity and inclusion. Talk a little bit about where we are, talk about where we work, how does all that mix, and then I thought I might talk a little bit about as well some case studies. I'll do quick case studies on people who have done well with this, and I've got one of a place that hits home of where they've actually stumbled, and what is the cost of inaction for this. So, okay, with that, I thought I'd start an exercise. And it's interesting. So when we say diversity, I'm going to start with that word first. I'm going to throw some words out there, and this is rhetorical for you, but all of you right now, when I say the word, probably has an idea or an image that pops in your head just automatically. So as I go through some of these words may be the word that you thought of first. It might not be. There may be a word on here that I didn't bring up that you thought of, but ethnicity, minority, religion, gender, culture, disability, gay, lesbian, talent, experience, age, generational. So diversity covers a lot of things. It's a very abstract issue, and what we're here to talk about today is how do you take something that abstract and outside of what the government tells you we have to do in terms of the HR component, how do you make that work in culture? Because everything we do, we're all individual, and we all bring something very unique. So we're going to start first with perspective, and we're going to first focus on our personal perspective. So everybody here is unique. What happens is, and I apologize, that comes out a little bit light, but every one of us has a story that impacts the lens through which you view others. What happens is, we go through life. We've all grown up in different places. You heard my background. I have a very diverse background and have experienced a lot of different things. My wife is from Shawnee, and she's well-traveled, but we don't see eye to eye on things sometimes, and she grew up very differently than I do. My kids are raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So they are going to see things differently than I see them. The people I work with and the people I work for are also very diverse. But all of our definitions are different based on our personal history. So what happens is each one of us has, whether we want to admit it or not, a preconceived notion with any of the words that I just mentioned. And that's totally normal, and that's okay. Today's discussion is not about you can't have those. Today's discussion is about, okay, let's embrace those. Let's get those out on the table, and let's try to find out where we are common, and not so much where we are different, but the differences actually will help the conversation evolve. So what happens is the perception of the differences within others shapes our ability to embrace diversity. And what that really means, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in specific, is some of us are more open to this than others. Black and white is I guess what I'm saying. So as I threw those names out there, or those words, there's probably a whole litany of other words here that fall under each one of these or that aren't on this list. But each one of us relates to one of these words differently. It was interesting. So, gosh, I guess it's been about 7 years ago. The Tulsa Chamber Board, I was on a board, and I was on the executive committee, and they had asked me to take a look at their minority business council. That's what it was called. And I asked then Chairman Don Walker, I said, Don, what does that group do? And he said, they've been struggling a little bit. We think you could bring some life into it. I'd like you to take a look at it and see if you might rearrange it or restructure it. So the very first meeting I had talking about diversity and inclusion was with a small group of the Tulsa Chamber Board, and this would have been about 2009-ish. And I threw up this word and I said, hey, if you Google minority, do a keyword search, these are the words that come up. And I said, and interestingly enough, I don't know if that is really the brand or the label or the first things that you want to talk about as we are trying to make the region of Tulsa a better place. I said, if you do a keyword search on diversity, these are the type of words that you get. You got tourism, tolerance, workforce, international business, attraction, retention, global marketplace, productivity, satisfaction, flexibility to changing needs, and growth through communication. I said, isn't that really what everything we do, what we're trying to do, trying to make Tulsa a better place? And the overarching discussion was, yeah, that's great. How do you do that? how do we become more diverse from that perspective? So that kind of started me on my personal journey through this. But before I get too far into the nuts and bolts of some of the things that are going on, I thought I'd share some of this with you. As each one of us has a different perception of diversity, Tulsa in itself is not typical. And you can, like you heard earlier, I've been around the world and I've lived in a lot of different places. I've experienced a lot of things, and I've chosen to stay in Tulsa because I think it's incredible here. And I have kind of a developer mindset. You see something, location, 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 and I can see, and it might be that the creative industry I'm in, but I can see Tulsa for what it could be. And I want my kids to grow up in that. But a few years ago, I was tasked with leading a branding and identity task force. And this group their goal was to come out and come up with a new brand for Tulsa, which sounds easy. It really wasn't. And first you have to ask yourself, okay, before we even start that, who are we going to invite to the table? So right there is a chance for a diverse conversation, right? So the first year, I think it started out with about 70 people, and we made sure that we had representatives from the different counties. We had representatives from the different areas within Tulsa, North Tulsa, South Tulsa. We try to cover graphically. Industry-wise, we wanted to make sure that we had the right industries at the table. So we had medical, we had corporate, we had creatives, we had small business owners, we had entrepreneurs, we had restaurant owners, then we had musicians and artists. And we kind of got it all together, but I thought I'd share this with you to see, so that you can take a look at Tulsa, because we work here, we hire people from here, and some of you, this is your core business. Some of us have business across the country, and some of us touch global markets. However, it starts here. So I wanted to share with you what came out of that group in terms of what these diverse people thought Tulsa was. So it started off with, we're wildcatters, right? Risk takers, the early entrepreneurs go out there and strike or claim. There was this romantic, and I will tell you, my Danish family, this is what they think of Oklahoma. In fact, I'm named after a gunslinger because my Danish grandfather told me, he said, you better name Shane after the cowboy. So, but that romantic cowboy can do, see it, do it attitude. We're doers. We're resilient. Visionaries. We're Native American. Innovators. Philanthropists. We're colorful. We're entrepreneurs. We're Tulsa tough. We're dreamers. We're investors, which is a key thing. What I think before Facebook decided to do their community, donate to the community foundation. Tulsa had the biggest community foundation in the country, or second, I believe. We're creatives. We've got guts. We're blended. So, and I know you can't read some of that. I've got some statistics off that I wanted to put together for you. So, the Tulsa Chambers, we started kind of running down this road. We started pulling some statistics together, and I wanted to share with you some of the keynotes on this in terms of Tulsa. So, right now, if you take a look at the demographic of what we have, 8% is African American, 8% Native American, 6.5%. Two or more races, like myself, 3.5% LGBT, and I will bet money that number's actually higher. I think that we've not been very welcoming as a community to that, so I think that number's higher. I think people probably just didn't report that as much. If you haven't heard, the Hispanic population is growing, and that's 9%, expected to increase to 17% within the next 3 to 4 years. And in school, we're looking at a 1.5% growth in children 5 to 17 by 2018. And again, I'll read you some statistics off that. Across America, what does that mean? And I bring this up because this kind of goes back to the comment I made earlier. We're here in Tulsa. However, many of you will be pulling talent from across America or entering markets across America. So rationale for my logic here. So by 2050, here's some of the predictions we have. In terms of the white population, we're seeing they're predicting a decrease of 7%, an African American an increase of 3%, Asian Americans an increase of 4%, Hispanics an increase of 30%. Interesting note here, 44% of adults on the survey across the United States have changed their religion in their lifetime. 71% of the individuals unaffiliated with religion right now are all under the age of 50. So you may or may not have heard, I know my church talks about it too, the younger generations are not getting as plugged in with religion, and that's an important thing to know. Why? Because we are in the Bible Belt. So it's just some interesting facts that you should consider. The population makeup by 2050 is predicted to be, so people under the age of 19 to be 26%, people between the ages of 20 and 64 to be 54%, and the ages of people in the over 65, that population is predicted to increase by 20%. So what is this? This is really just saying our world is changing. Tulsa's changing, the diversity across our country is changing. And technology is making that change much more prevalent in what we do. So Dr. Milton Bennett did a study in terms of, so we're going back to perspective in terms of kind of gauging where you fall on the range or the spectrum of diversity. And so he had two terms. He had one, ethnocentric, which is kind of on the lower side of acceptance, and then the next slide I'll show you is a different group, but it starts with, from a 0 to 10, 0 would be denial. You have no interest in cultural differences. And I'll tell you that I don't think there's going to be any organization you'll ever have where that's not going to happen. And again, I'm not here to tell you that your goal is to go to work and change everybody's mind and make everybody get along. That's not it. What I think you have to do is understand that you will have that dynamic. And even though that person has no interest in cultural difference, and if you're going to be true to diversity, you still have to engage that person. So how do you do that, right? Then you got defense. My culture is the true culture. So yeah, there's other cultures, but not like mine. Minimization views differences between cultures as inconsequential. As you get to the more proactive, so the ethno-relative, according to Dr. Bennett, you have acceptance, so cultural differences exist and should be respected and valued. Adaptation, shift in thinking and behavior to incorporate different cultures and perspectives. And then integration, which is kind of that highest level. I incorporate other cultural views into my own. what I think is interesting is that I think different people, and this is a personal opinion, if you go back to the slate of words I put up there that people tend to view diversity with, I think depending on what word, people fall in different categories according to these two realms, if you will. So here's the interesting thing. In the workplace, we're exposed to a spectrum of diverse dynamics we did not choose. So you chose your spouse or your boyfriend or your girlfriend, and you chose your church. You chose your sports team. You chose the group of friends you hang out with or whatever hobbies you with. You do that because when you're outside the office, you have the ability to really just kind of pick and choose, right? When you get into work, that's not so much the case. Many of us, especially if you're on the HR side, or if you're in leadership and you are hiring a person, we've all been in that situation where you bring someone on because on paper they looked awesome. And you go through, they've got the experience, the nuts and bolts are all there, they've got great references. You go down about a year, sometimes even quicker, and sooner or later, something in the culture didn't click. And it didn't work out. And over my career, I've seen that happen. And it's because when we go to work, we're typically hired because of our experience, not necessarily our morals, which brings in ethics, right? So we all have morals, and they all range. And you get into the workplace, and now you're put in a room or an office with a bunch of people that may or may not share that same view with you. So when you look at ethics, the definition, they've got morality there. And I think that's important because when we talk about business, we talk about, what is a great business talks about team first. My personal opinion is our teams define us. So before we can start talking about teams, I want to make sure everybody's on the same page in terms of what diversity is and what inclusion is. It's used interchangeably, I have found, and it's interesting. So diversity is kind of the ingredients, if you want to use that analogy of food. And inclusion is the recipe. So how do you get those ingredients to make a meal? If you take a look at all the different initiatives that go on in our business, we have a lot of different things where you need a completely different set of ingredients to get to a certain goal. I think you guys can all see that, right? So inclusion is a recipe. And this is where I think businesses or communities can either excel or fall flat on their face. So in the workplace, inclusion impacts team building, first and foremost. If you've got a strong team and they've got diverse talents and they believe in you, you're way ahead of the scale. Value, that's another important thing. When you talk about, and we're going to talk about how value leads into innovation here in a second. But value is when your team member feels you have their best interest in mind. They trust you. They trust their coworkers. Innovation is directly tied to that. We're going to talk a little bit about that more in detail. And then strategic planning. Those, I believe, go in order, in that order, in my opinion, because you can have all the strategic planning if you want. If your team leaves you, you're starting from zero, right? Because your team brings dynamics with it, and they bring talents and skills and perspective. So inclusion has a very real impact on where your business is going. And innovation stems from the ability for creative dialogue to flow freely within the professional arena. So I'm going to talk a little bit about creativity and innovation. As a design professional, I hear people interchange those two words all the time, and they're very different. Creativity, everybody has creativity. Innovation is the ability to take creativity and implement it in some kind of process that you can then measure. Okay, so the problem is, in the workplace, how do you get people to freely communicate a creative idea? I'll give you an interesting example. In our company at Nabholz, we have an innovation grant because in our industry, and I'm sure in some of yours too, especially with safety, that's our number one most important thing internally for us. If we mess up, someone dies. And that's not something that anyone ever wants to deal with. So we have created an innovation grant, and it can go up to $10,000. And all you have to do is come up with an idea, and if the board likes it, they'll give you $10,000 to let you run with it. We don't get very many people that want to give ideas. So we had a conversation at our last retreat about, okay, why is that the case? And I brought this up. I said, well, here's the thing. I think we have lots of creative people. I think we have lots of ideas. I said, I think the thing that we don't have, it's the old dynamic of you being the new kid in the school, someone asks a question and you don't want to raise your hand. Because many reasons. You don't want to look dumb. You may not like the group you're in. You don't feel valued. You're not quite sure if they're going to think you look like an idiot. So going back to the slide before, if you can create value in the workplace, what happens is the ideas start flowing a little bit more freely. So creativity is the first step, but in terms of inclusiveness and making people feel like their ideas, or setting up a system, if you will, where people can freely communicate and feel valued and that you have their back and that you're not going to throw them under the bus, that's where innovation starts. So innovative teams are diversified in experience, which we all are. That's the basic. They become unified in the culture. So if you create value and you get this team's buy-in, the culture with which you're setting, they become unified. And what I mean by that is when you bring in new people, there's that expectation that culture is there by where the new people understand what they're dealing with and what they're getting into. They feel valued by leadership. That's important. Diversity is interesting because diversity really should be all-encompassing. You should be looking and treating the intern coming in for summer the exact same way you treat the CEO. However, in my opinion, I think at least in the workplace, the CEO has the most power to be the most influential with this. And out of that, you gain loyalty. And as we all know, with the talent for war, loyalty is a big deal. Okay, so our perspective towards diversity defines our circles of influence. So if you are a startup company with 2 or 3 people and you don't give a flip about diversity, it's probably not going to impact you too much just yet, right? Depending on who you hired. But as you grow, we have businesses in here. Myself, we do most of our work is within a 6-state region in central United States, but we have projects across the country. My team has to be not only able to identify with our clients that are outside the realm of Tulsa, the clients that don't understand any of the things I just shared with you about why Tulsa is great, but we also have to have the staff that is willing and able to do that. So what happens is diversity, just from a strategic standpoint, can either enhance your circles of influence, or I think it can actually halt you. So it impacts attracting and retaining your talent. How many times have you heard kind of our young up-and-comers come in and they said, you know what, heard so much about the culture of your company, that's why I came. It's like, yeah, we've got 3 companies and this one does this one does, they all do the same thing, but this one I have heard is just awesome to work for. It impacts processes and operations. You get those different perspectives. A lot of our leaders are in business, they're there for a reason. They've got a lot of experience, but I always believe that there could be one idea out there that we haven't thought about because we're so used to looking at the same thing over and over that someone else with a fresh perspective could bring. It affects your brand. So, Oklahoma has suffered a little bit with diversity, right, and inclusion nationally. We've said done some things that have gotten some national attention, and that's turned some businesses away, some site selection groups that are coming into the state of Oklahoma. Their clients want an inclusive environment. Target audience, that one's an easy one. You better know your client. And then strategic growth, as we mentioned. So what I thought I'd do is run through this. These are some notes that we generated, at least along my journey pushing this in terms of the business case for diversity. You have the heightened competitive advantage in a global economy. I think probably 90% of businesses want to grow. And again, with technology, things are changing. I'll give you a good example on the architecture side. We did a lot of work here locally, and but the dreams of a lot of our younger guys were to go do that exotic museum in Italy, right? We were having discussions on how do we outsource. So while we're sleeping, how can we outsource drafting skills to India or Philippines? Those conversations are happening because of technology. So broaden creativity and innovation, and again, notice those two are side by side. Expanded perspectives, improved products and services. That one's interesting. I've had a good opportunity to spend some time with the executive coach that helped a lot of the Walmart executives, and it's really interesting to hear some of her stories about the issues they dealt with diversity in terms of when Walmart was trying to move into global markets and the things they had to change. Reduce turnover. Have you guys figured out it costs a lot of money to retrain somebody? No. Enlarge markets, lowered healthcare costs. I want you to remember that one because I'm going to do a case study on that. So remember, lowered healthcare costs. Enhance employee self-image, decrease risk of employment litigation, and then elevated community profile standing, which is important, especially in Tulsa. It's a very philanthropic community. You're expected to do right. Okay, so with that, that's all easy to say. I kind of narrowed this down. There are 4 steps in terms of organization, best practices, awareness, and assessment. Assessment really needs to start internally, I think. You really got to think about where do you stand on this and be true to that. And either you want to learn more or you don't want to learn more. That's fine. But I think you owe it to your company and your staff and your team to make sure that they know where you stand. Strategic planning, learn more about this. Implementation, making sure that in every aspect that in your business, there's always a way to get diverse perspectives into this, and an accountability. And this is a big one, holding people's feet to the fire when they are, and I'm just going to use the word disrespectful. We had an instance where I had a team member say something like this. It's like, hey, you don't pay me to get along with everybody. You pay me to do my job. And I said, that's not exactly true, because one of our core values is culture and respect. And I said, that's not going to work. But the thing is that, that person is expanding their horizons in other fields, I guess. I wish I put it that way. But, I want to challenge you to that, because the thing is that I not done that, then I'm just talking, right? I've got to walk the walk. And so that's you've got to make sure. And I promise you, it's a little bit rough at first, but when it starts getting around that culture is expected and it's required, that team gets tighter. And it takes some time, but it starts happening. So what it comes down to really is, and this is a term we use in urban design, it's genius looking Latin term, but the special atmosphere of a particular place. It's really about what kind of culture are you setting within your company or your places of business to make sure that you are being proactively inclusive. And then really if I had to boil it down to one thing, it would be, different perspectives are not only welcome, but they're sought out. I will tell you, though, that I think and I forgot earlier it was mentioned, but actually it was a little kid on the video. And he said, hey, let's disagree, but let's be respectful about it. And that's exactly what you're looking for. And there are a lot of people that are really good at it. There are a lot of people that cannot do that, but if you start now. So here are some things that just for me, I've kind of put into place, and just as I look at Gauge for succession planning, whatever business or initiative I'm looking at, whether it's a nonprofit or a business, I kind of look at individuals, especially if they're in a leadership position, and I'm like, all right, do they have cross-cultural competency? I mean, do they understand this? On that chart that I showed you of the 6 different, they've got to be in that top 2 tier of being able to integrate different ideas and perspectives without getting defensive. Soft skills. You can have somebody who is very diverse and they want to tell you their opinion, which is great, but they come in like a bull in a china shop and they make everybody mad. And We have those, and the sad thing about that is what they're saying and the points they're making are absolutely right. Most of the time they're dead on. We need to hear that, but they've made everybody in the room mad. So you can coach around that, I think, in most cases. Sometimes you can. Ability to identify the right person for the task regardless of title. I think getting different perspectives and seeking out different perspectives from diverse individuals is good because a lot of times, in my opinion, a title really doesn't mean anything. Some of us have moved from job to job and we have a title, but then you have this whole background of experience that you've had before that sometimes your title doesn't necessarily tap into. So when you look at different initiatives, you're going to have the leader in there, but mix it up a little bit, get the interns in there. And when you're looking at promotions, sometimes the org chart doesn't make the best sense. And then this one's a little bit, it's got a mutation off the CEO of American Airlines, so got to give him credit. But diversity fuels but never obscures the moral and ethical duty we all have to treat all those we encounter as unique individuals worthy of respect, dignity, and appreciation. I put those up there because for me, I think if you're sitting in the leadership seat, you have to have that. And I think that's just a prerequisite, and that goes beyond your experience and what your resume says. So that's also hard to know unless that person's been with you for a while. Someone coming in and telling you they have that in a job interview could backfire later. Okay, so in the context of the business arena, I want to throw just some ideas out there. We talked about different people, different perspective, different markets, different strategies, different growth patterns. So a startup in Tulsa, IT firm, think about how much diversity they have to deal with. Maybe not so much if it's a startup internally, but they are in the virtual world. So who are they impacting, and what do they need to know for that? Industrial and manufacturing. That one's an easy one. That's in terms of the amount of diversity and inclusion that they have to deal with. Food processing, legal, engineering, accounting, your professional architectural firms. What are some of the things that they have to deal with? Home-based businesses that deal with social media. So these are your guys and gals who have decided to stay home and they're working from a laptop virtually, but their clients are virtual. Construction, which we've talked about. What does the Oklahoma City Thunder have to deal with? I mean, think about that, what that general manager has to deal with in terms of getting his players and the diversity he has on that team. It's kind of interesting. I'm going to say this, but in sports, no one ever has a problem with diversity and inclusion, right? But you bring it to work, and then you're like, wait a second. How about our Tourism and Sports Commission? When they are trying to attract sports and venues to Tulsa, or when they bring a sports and venue to Tulsa, how do they get that out and communicate it? One of the companies that I have is a janitorial company. I can promise you I deal with a lot of HR issues on diversity and inclusion that I never deal with or never dealt with on the architecture engineering side or the construction side for that matter. But that's even on one of the most basic jobs, oldest jobs in history, this comes into play. What if you do work with the tribes? How sensitive should you be? Pretty sensitive, right? What if you're doing work with the Schustermans? Right? How about the nonprofits that we have? Because we've got a lot of them. And from the nonprofit perspective, how as they're looking for donors and they're approaching people, how aware do they need to be? And then you take a look at the educational sector. They are trying to attract people to Oklahoma and keep them here. And then I threw that one up here. We got American Airlines here, and they touch the globe. Okay, so real quick, I was just going to give you some real quick examples. I know we're getting close on time, but so I want to brag on our company a little bit. We talked about healthcare, and you've all heard, and if any of you have ever heard Dr. Clancy talk, he does an excellent job on talking about diversity and inclusion as it impacts healthcare. But access to healthcare is a big deal, and very proud of our company for that. So, creative idea, hey, we have 1,000 people, we're going to have 1,000 more people And they are diverse culturally, they are diverse in location, and some of them are very nomadic. They travel from job to job, they're in the middle of nowhere. Safety is our number one goal. We really need to do something that can link those two. So there's a creative thought. Well, what spun out of that, which I can say is innovative, was a wellness plan that we created. And really what it is, it's really a mobile wellness group that goes to the different offices. Got a doctor, a nurse, a dietitian, and they go in, we do blood work, we do heart scans, they bring a mobile unit in, and it's amazing. We have saved some of our employees' lives that had issues that they didn't know they had. This got so much momentum that our company was featured on HBO for our wellness program. And it's amazing. And I'll tell you, it's one of the biggest things culturally that affects every single one of our staff members, regardless of any of the diverse issues we have, but is one of the most important, because now we know all our team members are getting the exact same equal access to that, and that is a huge diversity initiative. So that was one I want to brag on. Pixar. So you talk about innovative, and Pixar, if you're not familiar, I'm sure most of you are, if you've seen Toy Story, all the movies, I've seen a bunch of them. That is probably the most creative industry I think you could be in. And I sit there and watch that sometimes and go, how in the heck did they come up with that? I really do think someone was drunk when they wrote that speech. But the thing was, Harvard Business Journal did a study with Pixar on how do they foster innovation. And it was amazing, because what they did was they talked about diversity and inclusion without actually saying it, but it was all the same things. They realize in the Hollywood industry that the executives typically don't want to take risk, because they know what kind of movies work and what kind of storylines work and what kind of characters work. So the executives were always, we need to stay safe. But then I had all this young talent coming in going, no, we need to do this. The problem was the ideas weren't flowing. The executives were doing this, and the younger talent didn't have an opportunity. So in short, what they did was they created these workshops, if you will, or forums or arenas, and regardless of title, regardless of how long you've been there, they would put a product out, and the younger staff had a chance to completely critique it or throw ideas out on their own with zero repercussion. And if an idea spun off of that, the corporation would fund that idea and let them run with it, even if it failed. So it was kind of like the innovation grant our company started, but with Pixar, they were doing it on the creative side. So, and of course, you've seen the product that comes out of that. Mosaic, which you heard I started to tell you, that first conversation with the chamber board about this initiative spun off into a series of business leaders coming together, many of them in this room, many of the companies in this room help create that group. But what we did with that was we created a different angle towards addressing diversity and inclusion. One of the ideas I threw out was I said, well, we can go all day long and write a paper or do a newsletter or do something on email that says, hey, diversity is important, but look at our audience. Our audience are all the CEOs of the major companies in the Tulsa region. I said, what if Mosaic focuses on them, just them? What if we can change the mind of a CEO about how important this is? And then what that does, it then changes the culture of that company. And you start doing that enough times, and pretty soon what's happening is the culture, we spend, 30% of our waking hours at work? Whether you like it or not, you start absorbing some of that. So that's the plan it went with. And I think they have 190 members now. It's gained national recognition. It's moving along great. And I will tell you, I get so excited when I sit behind the scenes at a chamber meeting and we've got some big community initiative going up and it's not public yet. And I hear someone else who has no idea, that didn't know I was involved with Mosaic, and they say, hey, do we have all the right players here? Where's North Tulsa? We need, and I'm sitting there going, hey, it's working, baby steps, right? It's not perfect, but it's heading in the right direction. I'll tell you another success story too, was one of the CEOs, when this first started, that actually took me to lunch and said, I think this is a bad idea. He said, I think that, he goes, a lot of people here don't understand this. You're in the Bible Belt. They're going to think this is an LGBT initiative. They're not going to get past that. You're going to be swimming upstream. only to have that same person come back about 2 or 3 years later going, this is amazing. He said, it's completely changed my perspective, which then I know has changed his culture. OCCJ, the Oklahoma Center for Community Justice, one of the ways that I'm president of that this year, and their goal is to fight racism, bigotry, and bias in Oklahoma. But one of the things that they do that I love, which I think is great, is that instead of, where Mosaic, goes after educating CEOs, OCCJ is addressing, I think, 70 schools, Moises, in Tulsa, and 30 school systems in Oklahoma City now with a different and the same program. And we're going in and we're hitting the young kids and explaining a different version of what I'm saying now to these younger kids so that they understand it. So, diversity isn't a matter of if, it's already here. Anyway, I think OCCJ has hit the nail on the head in terms of addressing that. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about Guyman in 1 to 2 minutes. I was in Leadership, Oklahoma. We went to Guyman, and the mayor was kind enough to talk about some lessons learned. They have got the big pig processing plant out there. And he talked about how his community not being inclusive cost them millions. And he said the reason was that plant went up, and before they knew it, they had 9 different languages being spoken in that plant by the amount of workers coming in. They didn't have the housing to plan for these workers. And not only that, members within the community banded together to purposely roadblock any future housing from outside contractors trying to come in because they got very protective of their culture. And the thing is you always have to take a look at human nature. So you can understand that there's always going to be that. But on the financial side, what happened was the mayor said there were 2 or 3 other plants that had contacted them because of the success that the one that's out there now has generated, but they couldn't get the infrastructure in time because they roadblocked themselves. So the cost of inaction can have some very real bottom dollar impacts to you. So I just want to close with this. I know we're tying this to ethics. So I'll ask you this. Is it ethical to encourage respectful discourse? Is it ethical to allow opportunity for all team members to express an idea? Is it ethical to promote innovation through communication? Is it ethical to establish a culture that values unique perspectives? And is it ethical to provide leaders that seek to understand? I think so. I think anything else is unethical, in my opinion. If you want to learn more about any of the organizations I mentioned, Denise Reed at the Tulsa Chamber, she heads up Mosaic, and that is really more the business side of diversity and inclusion. And if you want to get plugged in with OCCJ, this is more, let's do this across the state type scope. But Moises is over there at the back of the room. You can talk with him, or you can get on the website. And thank you very much for your time.